I'm here with Gary Bolles, the chair of the Future of Work for Singularity University, which I personally believe, whose voice I believe is one of the most important to be heard right now, because many of us are going through cataclysmic shifts in our careers and work lives. So handing over to you, Gary, what are the key ideas that you would like to share with people at the moment?
No, I really appreciate your inviting me to have this conversation. So first off, I think it's really important to acknowledge that we're in absolutely unprecedented times. And so I think we can all be forgiven for feeling like we're a little bit in a science fiction movie, or maybe it's a bad waking dream. But that in a very short period of time, in a few weeks, few months, so many of the things that we believed we depended upon in terms of the ways that our lives, our careers, our organizations were running, we've had to basically reset all of that. So that's why I call this the Great Reset. I really do believe that it isn't just a pause, we're having to reinvent a huge number of things on the fly. Now, it's true that in many cases, we kind of knew these were things we were going to eventually have to do anyway. We were going to have to use technology more. We were going to have to have people that were working in a wide variety of different places, all collaborating with each other. We knew we were all going to have to become lifelong learners. We just didn't know we were going to have to do it overnight.
Right, and so this concept of the Great Reset, this is something new that you've developed, or it's yeah,
absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so what do you see as being the main arrows in the quiver that people need right now, or how can we, like one of my favorite ideas is the turning the crisis into an opportunity, that kind of concept. Right. What do you see as being the main approaches to that?
So no, excellent question. So the short answer is we have the opportunity to reinvent human work. I've spoken for a long time that we have a variety of things that we've kind of accepted in the way that we've constructed this thing we call a job. I say that a job is just a use case for work. It's one example, or it's one context for work. But in the shift from basically industrial models to the way that we work today, we've actually taken a whole bunch of the ideas like that people have to be in big buildings and all working together, and they have to do it all at the same time. And therefore we all have to keep moving to cities because that's where the majority of the people and the work is. And that we have to basically be part of a sort of cog in a machine in the work that we're doing. We've inherited all those from that earlier time. And I believe we have the chance to just reset that completely. I think we can focus on anchoring ourselves in the problems that we're trying to solve and the skills, the human skills that we use to do that. And we can envision the ways that we collaborate together as human beings.
And you have been a proponent of these kinds of new ideas for decades, presumably.
Well, so I was actually trained as a career counselor when I was 19 years old. I was never. I don't have much moral standing when I lecture about the future of education and speak to the heads of colleges, because I actually never spent much time in college myself at all. I was never interested. I barely escaped high school. So instead, I fell into the family business. And it just so happens that my father was a recovering minister, and he ended up writing a job hunting book, originally for ministers, and then he wrote it for sort of everybody. And it became a book called What Color Is Your Parachute?, which became the world's enduring career manual, has 10 million copies in print.
That was your dad.
But I was trained by my father. And
wow.
So when I was 19, I was trained in his methods. Mm-hmm. And so you can imagine you're 19 years old and you're doing career counseling for people in their 40s and 50s. Mm-hmm. What's your takeaway going to be? Well, the first one's going to be you should do what you love, because if people have been talking about being in the same dead-end job for decades, then that's really what I think the goal for so many of us should be. And then eventually what I found was what I loved was high tech. So I ended up coming into high tech, but I I was my father's business advisor for decades. We actually started a software company together 6 years ago, and then he passed away 3 years ago. But he left behind an amazing legacy. And so for the past probably 7 or 8 years now, my focus has been increasingly on the future of work, and basically taking a lot of the insights that we've seen from just about almost every economy is dealing with the same issues. Every society is dealing with the same basic issues. We're all at this inflection point of reinventing work. And I think that, that there are very consistent themes going through it. And what the Great Reset has done is it's accelerated all those things. It's not that so many of the things that we're dealing with today are all that new. Mm-hmm. It's that the speed, the pace, and the spread of the change has moved so much more rapidly than we would ever.
Our hand has been forced, if you will.
Excuse me?
Our hand has been forced. It was like before, It was a trend that was happening. Now it's like, okay, there's no choice in the matter. So, yeah. So what? Okay, so and you've been following these trends, and kind of you're an authority on them. You're working in Singularity University, which is one of the most future-focused organizations on the planet. What are the tools? How can people, inside organizations? So there are two main categories. There are employed people, and there are like entrepreneurial people. Are there more categories of people, or how do you sort of distinguish, and what are the tools for each of them? What are the actions?
Yeah. So one of the ways I talk about how we can sort of rethink what work is in an old model. My father, after he wrote What Color Is Your Parachute, he wrote a book called The Three Boxes of Life, and so we had this old model that many of us followed, although nobody told us these were the rules when we were born, of a big chunk of education at the beginning of our lives, then a big chunk of work, and then a big chunk of leisure in what I call the period formerly known as retirement. And he called those the three boxes of life. And that was kind of a linear process that we all would go through. But today, a young person comes out of college, and sure, they might have a day job, but they're also driving for Lyft at night, and they're working on a startup with their friends. So I call this a portfolio of work. So think of it as a range of different use cases for work, but increasingly we're going to have portfolios of work. And so there's one use case, which is a person with a day job, and there's another person who is an entrepreneur starting a company. There's another use case where somebody is actually doing a whole bunch of different projects. All of those are increasingly more common models, but that use case of an individual job, that's actually something that is eroded and will continue to erode as we find more and more opportunities where people are able to apply their skills to a whole bunch of different kinds of problems, and as organizations are changing the way that they think about how they help to channel human energy to be able to solve problems. So you asked some of the things about some of the takeaways for this era. So if you step back and you think about, well, what is the sort of process that you're trying to go through as a human and trying to figure out the problems that you're most optimized to solve, it turns out that each of us has a tremendously unique mix of skills and interests and experiences. And if you think of that as a Venn diagram, so this is all the things that are true about you, and here's the work that you do. What happens is we're continually trying to optimize that overlap over our careers. Now, some people, it matters tremendously to be having the best possible overlap with your skills and abilities and the work that you're doing. And other people, well, maybe not so much. You're just getting paid, you're just showing up and working 9 to 5, and that's enough. Well, that might have been okay in what I call the old rules of work. But in the new rules of work, I've got 9 courses on LinkedIn Learning, and one of them is called the New Rules of Work. There's a tremendously different skill set that's needed, and one of them is, I believe, that if we're not driven by more of a passion for our work, or the kinds of problems that we want to solve, or the kinds of skills that we want to use, we're going to find it harder and harder to be able to find those older use cases of just the kind of jobs that you would show up for.
Right. So what you're saying is the old models are being eroded or becoming obsolete. We need to be sort of looking towards the new models. Speaking of Venn diagrams, the one that comes to mind is what you love, what the world needs, what you can make money from. That one, that crossover in the middle there is pretty key.
Right.
I'm
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Step one would be to rethink your approaches, your kind of the value that you can provide to humanity. Let's say you've done that analysis, you've come up with a short list. What would be a next step or next in line?
Well, so you actually, what you talked about is sort of three of the four key points of what the Japanese call ikigai, which I point to as a model all the time. So, and if you think of it as a stack, so it's typically you see it as a Venn diagram, but if you think of it as a stack, it's sort of the sequence that we would normally go through as we would mature in the world of work. The first thing that you want is to be able to get paid. Like, you'll do anything, just need to make money. And then after a while, you realize, oh, if I get paid for my work, I get paid better if I'm good at it. So now you're trying to find things that skills that you actually are adept at that you can apply to your work. And then, well, some people stop there. Excuse me. To them, that's enough. But one of the things that my father pointed to is, well, you have these skills that you actually really do enjoy using, and there are problems you really do love solving. So now it's what you love. And then, again, some people would stop there, but the real opportunity is to find what the world needs. And so with the model of ikigai, the Japanese will tell you that actually it's not a life well worth lived if you can't do all of those things. Well, but the old rules of work, you would start here at what you can get paid for and kind of move up the stack, and you would kind of stop along the way. Mm-hmm. Young people are coming out of college and they flip the stack. Mm-hmm. So they're asking, what does the world need? If I know what the world needs that I really care about, a problem that I want to solve, then I'm going to love doing that. If I love doing it, I'm going to get better and better at it. If I get better and better at it, I'll eventually get paid well for it. So, but that's just one model. And of course, if you need to pay the rent, you need to feed your family, you need to pay off your student loans, you may not have the luxury of flipping that stack. So what we first tell people is, well, the most common denominator between humans is that we are each born with a set of innate skills and interests, and we're optimized for certain kinds of problem solving. You need to figure out what that is, and we call that self-inventory. And there's tons of different ways to do that. But if somebody were to stop you in a hallway and say, I need you to tell me your top 5 skills in order of priority of how much you love them, most people can't answer that question. So that's the place to start. And then think of it as if I know that's what we would often call what are your unique skills and interests, and how do you prioritize the ones that you love?
And it's a self-inventory.
Self-inventory.
Okay, got it.
Then it's where. What are the scenarios where you could use all those different capabilities?
Okay.
And then finally, what we often think of as job hunting is the how, like the mechanics. But if you had a really good sense of what you love doing, the skills you most love using, the problems you most love solving, and the different places you could use those capabilities, then you would be able to modify your existing job. So you're doing more of the things you think you're good at and that you love doing. You'd be able to, if you need to go find new work, which in the United States, quite a good number of people are going to need to. In the past 2 weeks alone, we've had about 10 million people apply for unemployment benefits, which has never happened in such a blinding period of time. We're going to have a lot of people looking for work.
Yeah.
And so then if each of those people had a better understanding of their own unique skills and abilities, and they could understand better where some of the needs and opportunities are, then they would be far better, more adept at either finding or creating that work. And if you're an entrepreneur, you're going to go create that work.
Okay, so I've gotten clearly that the first step is to do the self-inventory, this contemplation, deep work inside yourself. Let's say an individual has done that exercise. I think that there is a bigger challenge in finding what the world needs. Do you have any approaches to that, or how? Yeah.
That's a good question. So, and again, some people are motivated by what the world needs. Others are motivated by just problems that they love to solve, and if people benefit, somebody in the world benefits from you solving those problems, then that's sort of icing on the cake. So what we find is that each of us has a set of our own unique values, and you can think of values as being beliefs that we put into action. So you can tell me what you believe, but what I really want to know is what do you actually put your time into, or what are the things that you're passionate, kinds of problems you're passionate about solving that you see in the world? Mm-hmm. And so that is there's a range of different techniques to do that. But one of the things that we tell people, use it. Take an exercise. What if you could wave a magic wand and you just suddenly didn't need to work for money? What if you just had enough money? Now, what are some of the problems that you have seen in the world that you have spent a little time on, maybe you've donated to, or what are the things that you're passionate about that you think the world needs? And in the past, you couldn't take that time because you needed to keep on making money, the baseline of Ikigai. Mm-hmm. And so there's a range of different opportunities to be able to think about the problems in the world that most resonate with you, and then what the way you would be able to use your skills to be able to help solve those problems.
Okay, so again, that's an exercise where you're doing a thought experiment and you're coming up with the short list. How do you go about validating or testing those assumptions and seeing whether whether you're on the right path and you can create some kind of traction with what you're doing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what we find is if people go through the process of just understanding their own unique skills, and then they go through the process of seeing different scenarios where they might be able to use those skills, then it's a process of gathering information about what's outside of you, what's out there in the world. And so we often talk about, obviously there's tremendous information that's available online.
That's the problem.
Almost too much. Everything, and the range of different occupations that people do to be able to focus on different kinds of problems. Every country has, or a number of Western countries have databases. In the U.S., there's one called ONET, but there's a range of different sources that you can look at that you can actually look at the skills that you love to use and how those skills would be used in particular occupations. We actually have a site called eparachute.com where people can do that. And then it's informational interviewing. It's gathering information. It's talking to people. So again, wave your magic wand, you can envision that there is a particular kind of work that you would love to do. Try to find people who are actually doing that kind of work, and then ask them, how did you get into this line of work? What do you love about it? What do you not love about it? Where are there others like you that I could talk to, so I could actually understand what that work might be like to do? And if you can't find anybody else who does it, well, that's an opportunity potentially to create that work, to find an organization that cares about that problem, but may not actually have an existing job to do that. And in this era where so much work is, there's many gig work platforms, there's lots of different ways to be able to do projects remotely for organizations that want to solve a very specific kind of problem. There's just tremendous opportunity to be able to try to do that with a range of different companies, maybe not even a company that's in your same country.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is step one is you've done an internal analysis and everything. Now it's time to reach out. You sort of start to look for people who have been doing that. You pick up the email and you contact them. You ask them, would you mind speaking to me about, I'm interested in this. Would you mind a quick little session about how you approached it, how you got into it, etc. Let's say you email 10, 20, 30, 50 people, you're going to get a percentage of them who reply. You use that to help you develop an approach. Maybe some opportunities will arise from that process as well. That's one step. Another step in parallel is to speak to organizations and do the same kind of thing, but with an organizational focus on organizations who might be interested in supporting or leveraging, capitalizing on the things that you found. Is that accurate?
Very, very good. So just a couple of sort of extra thoughts about this. So when you do informational interviewing, what we find is obviously as humans we validate people by the people that introduced them to us. So connections are really helpful. Mm-hmm. My father used to call these bridge people. But the basic idea is that, sure, you could just ping somebody out of the blue on LinkedIn, but we're all busy. And so it's, that's one route, but wherever possible, you want to find some connector, somebody who can help you to talk to people. So what you can say is, so let's say you care deeply about education. You care deeply about refugee populations. You're fascinated by what a variety of different UN organizations are doing. Well, each of those is an entry point. You can go to everybody you know in education and say, do you know anybody that's working with refugee populations? Mm-hmm. You can go to everybody that you know that might be connected to one of the UN organizations and say, do you know somebody who's focused on education? You can use those as steps. Think of them as just sort of leapfrogging to be able to try to vector towards the person who's doing the kind of work that you want to do.
And that's also coming back to another inventory, which is your network inventory. You sort of do a little sketch of who you know, categorized, and start going through and trying to find people. By the way, for the audience, just so that you all know, I reached Gary through an email. So this what we're talking about actually works.
It works.
With no intermediary, but I think this is really important for people. I think it's really important for people who are struggling or suffering in terms of job security or income security, that you start to take action like this, and know that you are resilient. This is, by the way, one of the main concepts that one of the main themes that we're coming across during this summit is the concept of resilience. And this type of resilience is like career resilience, earning resilience, work resilience, if you want. So I think it's very valuable that people are aware that they have the power. There's no one's going to give it to them. They have to find it inside, I guess. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we're young, we think of careers, if we picture them at all, we normally don't have any idea how that work box works. We sort of just trying to figure it out. But if we think of it at all, we kind of think of it as this nice linear. But most people, it's not like that. It's actually a fever chart. and so resilience is about building up the muscle capability, the capacity when you're up here, one of the little peaks, that to be able to deal with the problems when you drop down, below the baseline. And so when you think of career resilience, what you want is to be able to continually have anchors to go back to. And what happens, unfortunately, for us as humans, I spend a lot of time talking about the neuroscience of work. As humans, what we do is we tend to have this merciful lack of memory for the things that we've accomplished before. So I talk about mindset and skill set, right? And so we often have this mindset that we don't have any there's not all that many skills that are unique. I mean, anybody can do the work that we often do, and that it turns out there's actually some pretty good neuroscience to explain why that's true. But the problem is that when we go to one of the things that actually impacts our resilience is our perception of our ability to solve problems. Mm-hmm. And we tend to sort of forget all the times that we've solved all these problems in the past. So that's one of the things that doing some kind of self-inventory can help with. It can actually help to build resilience, because you look back at all the things that you've accomplished, and that can simply increase the strength within you that that you can solve the next problems that you're going to encounter.
Very nice. And I might extend on that and say, if you call yourself a good problem solver, you will be a good problem solver. Just that, kind of placebo effect.
Correct. Yeah. And if you don't think of yourself as a problem solver, I mean, this is really why people pay us, and why it's why other people pay. It's why we pay other people is to solve problems. Mm-hmm. Now, in every organization, there's one or two people who think it's their job to create problems, and you probably know exactly who those are in your company. But for the most part, we're problem solvers, and so it's important to, when you think of the work that you have done in the past, look specifically at the kinds of problems that you've solved, because those are transferable into other work that you do, right? If you're the kind of person who's always good at brainstorming, you're the kind of person who's always good at breaking down the steps that people need to follow. If you're the kind of person that is good at developing creative solutions, you're going to be good at that in a range of different situations.
Very nice. Very nice. Okay. So we're on the tail end now. We're in the home stretch. How do you think we should be reimagining human work, considering current climates and the current situation? Is this something we've covered before? Do you have any extensions on that?
So, I mean, I think we're all sort of getting some of the memo. So, so I have four sort of skills that I point to that are anchors for reinventing human work, and to think about what each of us needs to do. And it's actually sort of resonates with pretty much everything we've just been talking about. Yeah. So I talk about PACE, problem solvers who are adaptive, creative, and with empathy. And I think this is sort of what our next step in work is. So problem solvers, because as we've just been discussing, that's why we pay people and why people pay us. Adaptive, and this is one of the most critical skills right now in a world that has gone topsy-turvy. We're rewriting the rules of work, and one of the things that we find is that suddenly everybody having to work from home has been a tremendous test on our adaptivity. Mm-hmm. And so having an adaptive mindset is critical, because this is going to happen again. Today it's a virus, tomorrow it's going to be generalized artificial intelligence. We're going to have these resets again. Creative, because that's what keeps us ahead of robots and software. It's our human ability to do creative problem solving that will allow us to continually differentiate from the technology that is replacing more and more of human work. And then with empathy. That's critical, because that's another thing that differentiates us from robots and software. But it's also what allows us to be able to collaborate effectively as human beings. And so you can say this is what a worker, what helps us to have agency or resiliency as problem solvers who are adaptive, creative, and with empathy. It's also what an entrepreneur does. An entrepreneur falls in love with a customer problem, falls in love with a customer problem, is adaptive and creative in the way that they're continually trying to iterate to solve those problems.
Okay, so that's a very powerful framework for people to meditate on, contemplate, and put into practice as well. So thank you so much for sharing with us. I'd like to ask you, in parting, what message would you like to leave our audience with at this time?
So there's just one thing I'd say. We haven't talked much about leaders in organizations, and we talked more about people as individuals, and of course every leader is an individual as well. But just one point for leaders that I think is important. So I'm asked, especially in times like this, I'm asked what are some of the most important characteristics for leaders, and I just want to leave you with three. So competent, compassion, and courageous. So leaders need to be competent, because especially in times of uncertainty, especially when we're going through a great reset, they need to be good at their jobs. They need to be good at their work, because it's what generates respect, right? You're going to find workers are not going to be as resilient. They're not going to be as responsive if they don't think you're doing your best possible work. And that doesn't mean you have to be perfect. You can be as transparent as possible, but you need to be as competent as you can possibly be, because you're sending signals to others. Compassion, because this is the yin and yang. We also are human beings, and we have to understand that all the workers who are going through this reset, they have lives and they have families, and this is impacting everybody. And so competence and compassion are the sort of yin and yang. But to make decisions that are hard, to be able, for instance, to keep on paying people when your company has, the loss of customers, or in these tough periods, being a courageous leader means having to make tough decisions, but doing everything possible to try to support the people that work with you. And so, competent, compassion, and with courage. Beautiful.
Well, that's a great way to wrap up. Thank you again for your contribution. We will be posting links to your material. You said your LinkedIn courses. Would that be one of the main places?
Sure. If you just on LinkedIn, if you follow me on LinkedIn, that's where I post pretty much everything. So, but then I've also got nine courses on LinkedIn Learning as well.
Okay. Thank you again. Until next time, sir.
Ciao. Thanks for the conversation. That's great.